So let's get started. I am joined today by two great speakers. Our featured author is Michael Ray FitzGerald, a freelance writer and media historian. He has written hundreds of articles for local, regional, national, and international publications. FitzGerald, a former career musician, has a bachelor's degree in journalism from Jacksonville University, a master's in mass communication from the University of Florida, where he also taught journalism, and a doctorate from the University of Reading in Berkshire, England. He also taught at the University of North Florida, Flagler College, and the College of Coastal Georgia. He has written 4 books, including 2 about the music of this area, Swamp Music, and his latest book, Jacksonville and the Roots of Southern Rock, right there. Joining him in conversation is Alan Bliss. Alan has a PhD in history from the University of Florida and has taught U.S. history topics since 2006 at the University of North Florida, where he remains adjunct faculty. Most importantly, Alan is the CEO of the Jacksonville Historical Society, which is launching a music history project in the near future. So Alan, I will turn it over to you now.
Allison, thank you for that introduction. And I bring greetings from the staff and the board of directors of the Jacksonville Historical Society. It is an honor and a pleasure for us to collaborate with the great Jacksonville Public Library on this evening's Lit Chat. And it is particularly meaningful to us at the Jacksonville Historical Society. As Allison has mentioned, we are in the process of getting. Am I on? Okay. It's particularly meaningful for us to be participating in this because we're in the process of launching a music history project at the Jacksonville Historical Society. And I have become increasingly aware of the work of Professor FitzGerald over these past few years. He is really one of the leading voices in advancing scholarship, knowledge, and popular awareness of Jacksonville's significant role in music history more generally. This city has a lively, complicated history in just about every dimension that you care to consider. Music history is one of the things that really helps bridge a lot of Jacksonville's history and a lot of its people in the contemporary moment. That's one of the things that makes this book of Fitz's so meaningful and so engaging. It's arriving at the scene at a time when more and more people are becoming aware of the significance of music history. Professor FitzGerald's work joins an emerging body of scholarship. Professor Brian Ward at Northumbria in Great Britain has a forthcoming book on the history of the Beatles. Presentations in the American South during the years of the Civil Rights Movement, includes a chapter on their performance here in Jacksonville. Fitz and Brian Ward and I have been corresponding about that incident just recently over these past several days. Dr. Bob Beatty at Middle Tennessee State University recently finished a dissertation on the Allman Brothers Band, and that's a book forthcoming from the University of Florida Press. We are just at a moment, I think, when the history of music is really crossing back and forth over all kinds of boundaries: social, business, economic, racial, cultural, ethnic, geospatial, any other way that you want to measure it. So this is a cool thing for us to be talking about, and I'm happy to join Fitz for this conversation.
Thanks, Alan, so much. I want to thank Dr. Bliss for joining me here this afternoon, and I really respect and appreciate his opinion and his input. And Allison, thank you too, because you've done a fantastic job of putting this together. So you sort of mentioned the fact that there seems to be a resurgence of interest in music from this area, and why now? Well, that's a good question. I think maybe it's because it's been 50 years, around 50 years since the formation of the Allman Brothers Band. That was the first Jacksonville Southern rock band. People think it was the first Southern rock band. I personally disagree with that assessment. There were other Southern rock groups. In fact, the Allman Brothers, the Dwayne and Greg Allman, were in one of the other Southern rock groups in Los Angeles, the Hourglass, way before they came to Jacksonville. So I don't think Jacksonville is the actual crucible of Southern rock, but it sure was the mother lode. And it's been 50 years since the Second Coming used to jam right over here, right next door right next door in this field right outside this library. And I used to come here and watch that. And they would play. The Second Coming was Dickie Betts's band and Barry Oakley's band. They came up here from Tampa. And they were the house band at a bar called The Scene. And they worked 6 nights a week there. And then they played Sundays for free on their day off. Why'd they do it? Well, they did it because they weren't reaching their audience at The Scene, because the audience at The Scene was a bar and the audience was over 21. And all the hippies were teenagers and they couldn't get in. So Barry Oakley had this great idea. Well, we'll just play for them for free and they'll find us and we'll find our audience. And that's what they did. And Ryan Reed here has been instrumental in researching and bringing that to the public's awareness. The Willow Branch Park could be arguably considered the home of the Allman Brothers Band, wouldn't you say? You know, it depends on how you define these things.
Every time I'm here, I walk around and look for ghosts out there in the park.
It's hallowed ground, is it not? Yep. So I was there, and that's the reason why I wrote this book. I saw Dwayne Allman sitting in with the Second Coming at the Woodstock Youth Center on Beaver Street. A friend of mine and I, well, let me go back to 1969. I was living in Freeman's Trailer Park in Orange Park on Kingsley Avenue, which is where the Orange Park Hospital is now. And it was, I had quit. I had gotten invited to leave Orange Park High School because my hair was too long. It was about like it is now. And the Coach Duncan said, "FitzGerald, we don't want you in our school." Well, that's fine with me, Coach. So I quit that school and I went downtown to Central Adult High School, where all the hippies went. And I met Coconut Harley. Anybody ever heard of Coconut Harley Lamoureux? And Phil Hodges, the guys with the long hair, the first hippies in Jacksonville. And down the street from me in the trailer park was this hippie named Paul Glass. And he had quit school and he'd just sit around his parents' trailer all day long and just play guitar. He had been in a band with Jeff Carlisi, who went on to play lead guitar on 38 Special. But my friend Paul would sit around all day long and play his guitar. And I had just gotten this brand new, beautiful SG Standard, Gibson SG Standard, for $348.40. And I heard there was a guitar player down the street and he was real good. So I just took my guitar and didn't have a case even. Took my guitar over there, knocked on the door. And he's like, "What do you want?" I said, "Hey man, I heard you play guitar. Maybe you could show me some stuff." He's looking at the guitar. "Yeah, come on." And he's really gruff, you know. He grabs he's holding my guitar and he's fondling it. And he's just really amazed with this beautiful new Gibson designed by Les Paul. And he says, "You don't deserve this guitar." Paul just died yesterday. I'm so sorry to say. And he wasn't always the most diplomatic guy, but he sure taught me a lot about guitar. So he told me the trick to playing the blues rock on guitar, you know, the string pulling. You had to use Ernie Ball 008 strings because they were so light and flexible, you could bend the hell out of them. So he's teaching me, you know, to play rock guitar, and Eric Clapton was our idol. And he was the idol of almost all these Southern rockers too. Alan Collins, Tom Barnes, Dave Lubeck, they all idolized Eric Clapton, and so did we. And so he said, "Man, you got to hear Dickie Betts. If you want to know about guitar, you got to hear Dickie Betts." So he said, we climbed on the back of his Honda 90. I climbed on the back of his Honda 90, and we went to Ravine Gardens in Palatka and heard Dickie Betts. And so we'd go see Dickie Betts everywhere we could. Dickie had just come up from Tampa, and he was playing at the Scene, but they would play, you know, other places, and with the Second Coming and Barry Oakley. And so one day we hitchhiked to go see them at the Woodstock Youth Center, and tell you, with long hair, hitchhiking in Jacksonville on the west side was a daunting prospect. I mean, it was no fun. And if you saw a muscle car coming, you better duck in a doorway or something, because you was fixing to get an attitude adjustment. Y'all know what that is, right? And so we braved our way to the Woodstock Youth Center, and there was this, in the Second Coming was playing, and there was this tall, skinny guy with stringy hair down in his face, wouldn't even look at the audience, had his head down, playing the guitar all night long, playing every single solo. And Dickie wouldn't play nothing. And me and Paul were really, really upset. And we started heckling this guy. Hey, we paid to hear Dickie. Let Dickie play. Dickie can play circles around this guy. We were heckling Duane Allman. And the funny thing about it, the ironic thing was Glass knew who Duane Allman was because he liked the Almond Joy. And he, pardon? Oh, never mind. He liked the Almond Joys, and he knew about the Hourglass, which was, you know, Duane and Greg's band that had moved to Los Angeles. But we didn't recognize the guy on stage, and it was Duane Allman, and we were heckling him. So that's sort of how I got into this. I was in the audience tonight when the group called 1% changed its name to Lynyrd Skynyrd, actually Lynyrd Skinnard. I used to go to the Forest Inn over on Lakeshore Boulevard, where WQIK is now, or right next door, and WQIK's transmitter rather. And that's where the Allman Brothers Band really got put together, because Duane started holding auditions for his group there. Even before he did the, even before they did the be-ins here. Duane Allman came to town. He's looking for musicians, and he had Dickie Betts and Barry Oakley, and he had J-Mo with them, and he had Greg Allman wasn't there. Greg was still in Los Angeles, and he had Don Finney on saxophone from Orange Park, and he had all these people jamming. And really, what Duane was doing is he's trying to pick the. He had a record deal already. He had his own record deal, but he didn't have a band, so he's coming to Jacksonville and jamming with all these people and picking the ones he wants. And he picked Dickie and Barry and Butch Trucks. He already had J-Mo, and he already had Barry. So the Allman Brothers Band was formed here in Jacksonville. And then the jams moved from the Forest Inn over here to Willow Branch. But what I wanted to say about the Forest Inn is I used to hang out there a lot. So after the Allman Brothers Band formed and left for Macon, they were only in town for 1 week. The Reese Winans from the Second Coming got left behind, and he had a little group called Ugly Jelly Roll. It was just him on organ, Gary Goddard on bass and vocals, and boy, Gary Goddard could sing like a nightingale, and a drummer named Fuzzy Land. It was just the three of them. They didn't even have a guitar player. Used to go up there and see them. One night I was at the Forest Inn, and 1% was playing, and man, they were terrible. My friend Richard Price, who was in the Second Coming, said, man, they were the worst band I ever heard in my life. And they really were bad. None of the Second Coming fans liked 1%. Now, to be fair, they did get a lot better later on. But so I was in there one night, and 1% was playing, and the singer goes, it is full of Lee High School students. It's not Lee High School anymore. But there was Lee High School then, and it was full of Lee High School students. That was about all that was in that crowd. And the singer goes, hey, y'all, what do you think about changing the name of the group? What y'all think? What y'all think about we change the name of the group to Leonard Skinnard? And the audience went wild. And I went to Orange Park High School, and I didn't know who Lynyrd Skinnard was. And so I leaned over to this hippie next to me. I said, hey, man, who's Lynyrd Skinnard? Well, the hippie says, oh, he's the PE coach at Lee who hassles them about their hair. So there's a couple of that. So that's kind of the reason why I wrote this book, is because I watched a lot of this transpire. And of course, Melissa Ross asked me on a radio show, did you ever have any idea you were watching history in the making? I'm like, of course not. Does anybody? And she said, did you did you ever think Leonard Skinnard would be as big as they got to be? I said, never, not for 1 second. And she said, why? And I said, because they were awful.
So Fitz, you were just talking about the 1%, and they started with no guitar. Can there really be?
No, that was that was Ugly Jelly Roll.
Ugly Jelly.
Yeah.
Okay, so can Southern rock exist without strings, without a guitar? Is there?
I would say absolutely not.
Yeah.
But see, I put Southern rock in the big picture. If you're a literary buff or you know anything about literature, you know what a romantic movement is. That's when a lot of people don't really like what's happening now, and they want to go back to the 50s or back to the previous century or back to better days when, literature was real literature and music was real music. So that there was a romantic movement afoot in 68. It was started by, I think, I could be wrong here, by Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan did his John Wesley Harding album, and then he recruited the boys called The Band to be his backup band, and then they were doing all this retro stuff, and they even dressed like they were from the 1800s. So there was this big retro movement going on we call roots rock, and I think that Southern rock is part of that romantic reaction to the progressive rock, to Yes and King Crimson and all this really complicated stuff. People wanted something simpler. They wanted to go back to simpler days, and you couldn't get much simpler than Lynyrd Skynyrd.
So this is a good segue into a question that I know you have wrangled with. You wrestle with it in your book. You have talked about this in other venues that I know of for sure. Have another crack, if you would, please, at helping everybody understand what Southern rock is, what you see as Southern rock. You've already given us one cue, has to have strings, got to be guitars involved.
Yeah, got to be guitar.
All right. And could be
at least
one, preferably more than one.
Or three.
Yeah, which is one of the signature, I guess, innovations of some of the rocks standout, Southern rock stands
The three
out.
guitar army.
So what else? I mean, I'm not going to quote from your book, but you may feel free to.
Well, I really wrestled with this for a long time, because what is Southern rock? Well, what is rock? Rock was rock, a certain kind of music. Was Mama Cass rock? Was Tiny Tim rock? What is rock? Was King Crimson rock? Was blues rock? Rock, I finally came to the conclusion, it was music for hippies. It was music for long-haired, LSD eating, marijuana smoking hippies. That's what rock was. So Southern rock is such an anomaly because hippies, weren't really welcome in the South in 1968 and 69. Anybody seen the movie Easy Rider? That's what it was like here, and I know because I experienced it. Southerners and what we called rednecks didn't like hippies, so Southern rock was a real difficult thing to reconcile. It was like music for the Southern hippies, and so it didn't matter what it was. It could be jug band music, it could be Jefferson Airplane, or they weren't from the South, but it could be jug band music or blues, or the music. It doesn't, the term doesn't refer to the music, it refers to the audience. So Southern rock was music for Southern hippies.
If an artist, a writer, composer is trying to put together something for a Southern audience, a Southern rock audience, what are the common denominators that you think they were looking for? Something lyrical, something in the theme, the message, something in the way the instrumentation is put together? Any common threads?
I think you hit the nail on the head. First of all, it's the themes. The themes have to be kind of rebellious because, teenagers are rebellious. And look at the song like Long-Haired Country Boy. That's very rebellious. People say I'm no good, crazy as a loon, because I get drunk in the morning and get high in the afternoon. So yeah, it's the themes and the lyrics more than anything. And then it's the guitars and the drums. And then it's the long hair. And that's pretty much the only, I think, mandatories. Had to have long hair, I think. Yeah, you had to have long hair to be in a Southern. You still have to have long hair to be in a Southern rock band.
All right, fair enough. So here's a question that I think this overlaps with the topic and the setting that you're talking about. Jacksonville at this time when it was, if not the crucible of Southern rock, at least a place where a lot of it was going on and sinking its roots. And we're looking at those roots. You're looking at it in your book. We're talking about that this evening. And I know this is another thing that you've been working on, radio. So what did radio in particular in Jacksonville have to do with fostering the culture of Southern rock and its acceptance and recognition and penetration? And you know where I'm going with this, WAPE.
That's a great question. WAPE played records by local bands, not very many, the Coronados, the Daybreakers, the Lemon Twisters, the Dalton Gang. I can't remember the others. It played records by a handful of local bands. And that kind of got people interested in local bands. And then they started putting on these teen dances. And instead of having DJs playing records, which they called record hops, they started bringing in bands. And so WAP kind of whetted the public's appetite for live music in this town. And that lasted for decades. And then they started having be-ins. Anybody, you know what a be-in is? A be-in is like the civil rights. What started the sit-ins with union workers who wouldn't go on strike and leave the building, but they just sit down and not work. You call it a sit-down strike. And then the civil rights demonstrators would have sit-ins where they would go to a segregated cafeteria and they would just sit there and not order anything and just take up the seats and, hopefully create a fracas, and the news cameras would come around and would get some publicity for their cause. Well, then there were love-ins. Okay, hippies had their love-ins. And then there were the be-ins where you just went there and did nothing. You just bead. And really, it was just an outdoor concert was all it was, but we called them be-ins. And WAP had be-ins on that huge field, where their transmitter was. And the Second Coming actually played there the day they left town for Macon with Dwayne Allman and Greg Allman. So WAPE had a lot of be-ins. They played some bands on the air, but they did more behind the scenes to promote local bands and local music. I don't think Jacksonville would be the music town it is without WAPE's contribution.
And just to make this, elaborate on this, WAPE covered a lot of territory. This is not just a Jacksonville following, right? They had a high wattage antenna. They put out a lot of power. They covered a lot of geography, right?
Yeah, man, it was a 50,000 watt blowtorch. It was clear channel at night. Clear channel means there's nothing else on that frequency. The next closest station on that frequency was in New Orleans, 690. But in the daytime, you could pick it up from from Melbourne, say, central coastal Florida, all the way to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and sometimes all the way into North Carolina. So, if a band got played on that station, they got a lot of exposure.
And AM radio, top 40 radio, that was where people were discovering music. FM really had not broken through. Album-oriented rock still really a few years out at the time that we're talking about. AM was where it was all happening, right?
Yep, and on top 40 radio, well, WAPE let the jocks have a lot of latitude. They could pretty much play whatever they wanted, but it was more or less top 40 radio. And on top 40 radio, you heard just whatever was popular. you could hear Perry Como and then James Brown, and then the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, all in the same 10-minute time stretch. So, and then you'd hear Vanilla Fudge and doing You Keep Me Hanging On, and you'd hear Spirit doing Mechanical World. And Ricky Medlock, who's in Skynyrd now, he was a singer for Blackfoot, plays guitar in Skynyrd now. I saw him in an interview with Matthew Mason. He said, WAPE was our world.
So you mentioned Ricky Medlock, a name to reckon with and anything to do with Southern rock history, right? And still in the game, still in the field. You quote Ricky Medlock early on in your book, trying to help unpack what made Jacksonville a place that we trace a lot of roots of Southern rock to. And one of the things that Ricky Medlock speculated is that it wasn't so much that Jacksonville grew its own homegrown community of artists who found their way to this art, but that it was that Jacksonville was a complicated place, a cosmopolitan place. How come? Because a lot of people found their way here from elsewhere. The Navy accounts for a lot of people, including Fitz, for winding up here in Jacksonville. It has been my experience in my role at the Historical Society here in Jacksonville that if you take 100 people in Jacksonville and ask them all how they got here, about a third of them will point to the United States Navy or the military in one of its incarnations, but mostly the Navy, because this is a Navy town. And even if a family didn't serve in the Navy or they didn't have a service member in the Navy, it still accounted for drawing a lot of people here, civilian defense workers, people who were associated with a family that found their way here, military retirees who lived here for a time, moved on, liked it, came back, drew other family members here. Jacksonville was a port city, still is. That means it was a point for immigration from all over the world, but especially in the rest of the Americas and from Europe across the Atlantic, right?
And the Philippines.
In the Philippines, there is always, has not always, but maybe for at least the past century and a quarter, been a lively Middle Eastern community.
A large Arab American community here, 90% of which are Christians.
Mm-hmm. And this makes it makes for Jacksonville being what I think is not very clear to a lot of people outside the city. Cosmopolitan, complicated, really interesting and variegated. And if Ricky Medlock was seeing that and laying that at the feet of Southern rock's evolution, I think that really helps make for a fascinating Jacksonville story.
And I think another element too is Jacksonville's pretty isolated. The nearest big city is Miami and Atlanta, and they're both 350 miles away. So, you know, we didn't get influenced by those places very much. We kind of had to create our own entertainment here, and it became kind of unique.
So the Navy brought you here and you stayed.
Yeah, I tried leaving here several times. And I just kept coming back. Well, it's a nice place to live. There's a lot of water. The weather's nice, well, most of the year round. And the main thing, I don't even want to say this because I don't want the secret out, but it's in terms of housing, it's the best bang for the buck on the East Coast, isn't it?
Well, I feel lucky to be here. I think it's at, as some people say, the perfect latitude and longitude climatologically and in other ways to get around other parts of the United States. You can fly almost anywhere from Jacksonville from a really decent, accessible airport that's a pleasure to travel through. We're at the conjunction of a couple of different interstate highways. And one thing that I thought you were getting ready to touch on is Jacksonville still has a lively music scene. Would you agree?
Well, it was pretty dead for a long time there, but I think it's starting to make a resurgence. But you know, COVID hit it pretty hard, just as it was about to reemerge. What really killed me? Oh God, I'm going to get crucified for saying this. What really I think killed Jacksonville music, the music scene, because it was really making a big resurgence in the '90s, and A&R people were starting to come back here then. and I was the head of the North Florida Music Coalition, and we brought in A&R guys, so I know what I'm talking about here. The DJs, started appearing, and the musicians got complacent. They would sit in a corner and play in the dark with no lights, and have a little pizza oven for a PA. And the DJs came along, and they had these fabulous light shows and disco balls and computerized lighting and 10,000 watts worth of subwoofers, and they were just kicking our asses. So we got really crucified by the DJs. But I think the thing that put the nail in the coffin was when the NFL came here, because football tickets game tickets are expensive, and there's only so many expendable dollars for entertainment. It's what, if it's say $50 for a ticket, there went that person's drinking money for the weekend. So people stopped going to bars as much and stopped spending money on live entertainment. So between the DJs and the NFL, we got killed.
Well, let's hope the Jacksonville's people no longer have to make a choice, either football or music. There ought to be room for both, right? Coexist in a place this big and this sprawling and this diverse.
Depends on how much money they have.
Well, listen, you've talked about a couple of bands that really are closely associated with the art form that we're talking about, the subgenre of rock, Southern rock. The Allman Brothers, you've already stipulated they're not the foundation, I guess, not the initiators of Southern rock.
Well, you could say the Allman Brothers themselves per se might be, because they were doing it in the Hourglass, but that was in Los Angeles, but not the Allman Brothers Band itself. A lot of what the Allman Brothers Band had been doing, Dwayne and Greg had already done even some of the same songs in Los Angeles with the Hourglass.
And you even traced it further back than that to their inception as the Allman Joys, right?
Yeah, you might even say they were the first Southern rock band. Actually, in 1967, they did an album on Dial Records in Nashville. But there was also Delaney and Bonnie, or rather Delaney Bramlett and Leon Russell, working together in Los Angeles. And I think what they were doing could also be considered Southern rock. So it's hard to say when it really started, but honestly, people, it didn't start in Jacksonville.
Okay, and then fast forward to Lynyrd Skinnard, who you've talked about a little bit. Talk if you can about some of the other Jacksonville bands that really populate this genre, other Southern rockers from Jacksonville.
Let me get a list here. I mean, I've got a chapter on each of those here in this book, but 38 Special, which was Donnie Van Zant's band, and he was Ronnie the singer from Lynyrd Skynyrd's little brother. Of course, you knew he was going to get a deal. I've included Graham Parsons as a Southern rocker here, and he did spend a lot of time in Jacksonville. He went to high school. He went to Bowles High School, and he graduated from Bowles, as a matter of fact, and his mother died from cirrhosis on his graduation night. So he came from a dysfunctional household, man, and he was messed up.
That's the kind of tragedy that inspires great art.
I'm telling you. So, I put Graham Parsons in this category, and I have a chapter about him in this book, even though, he left here before he got famous. 31st of February, that was a band that got signed in 68 to Vanguard Records, which was a folk label. They were a folk rock group, so they really didn't sound anything like the other Southern rock bands. Allman Brothers Band, of course. Cowboy is a little known band from Jacksonville. Lynyrd Skynyrd. Blackfoot. Blackfoot was a better band than Lynyrd Skynyrd when it was formed, but two of the guys from Blackfoot wound up in Lynyrd Skynyrd, and one of them is still in Lynyrd Skynyrd. 38, Molly Hatchet. Molly Hatchet used to do a Lynyrd Skynyrd tribute after the plane crash. Molly Hatchet worked up a whole little segment of their show that they played Skynyrd songs, and they closed with Freebird. And of course, they sort of wound up taking the baton from Lynyrd Skynyrd. When Lynyrd Skynyrd went down, they went up and occupied the same market position that Skynyrd had. And they'd be the first to admit that. Derek Trucks, I used to watch him when he was 9 years old. He was a little toe-headed blonde, about this tall. And the guitar was bigger than he was. He'd be sitting there with Greg Burrell at the beach. And he was a monster guitar player even then, but now he's probably one of the best slide players in the world. He's even better than his idol, Dwayne Allman. He's even better than Dwayne Allman. The guy is just like a synthesizer on the slide guitar. You listen to him, if you weren't looking at the guitar, you think it was somebody playing a keyboard. He's such a monster talent. It's just ridiculous. And he still lives in Jacksonville.
Still, we can still lay claim to the fame that that the Tedeschi Trucks Band brings to Jacksonville. Yeah.
Yes.
Towering figure.
He is Southern rock royalty. And he's also played with Bob Dylan and with Eric Clapton. And has not turned his back on Jacksonville. A lot of these guys, just when they get some money, they move away, but he has not done that. He still lives, he lives in Julington Creek. And he's a top flight talent. He's really not as popular, you know, he's as in terms of sales as he should be, but he's doing what he wants. You know, that's worth a lot.
Let's take one last landing spot for our discussion before we open it up to questions from the audience online and here in the room at the library. You've got Roots in the subtitle of your book, in the title of the book, Roots of Southern Rock. And we've talked a little bit about the groups, the artists, the personalities that inform Southern rock. Are there other musical forms that you think Southern rock artists drew from that inspired them, that we wouldn't really instinctively connect with Southern rock?
Well, the obvious ones are would be the blues first and foremost, and country secondly. The Allman Brothers incorporated a lot of jazz into that brew, which you might not have expected. And Allman Brothers had kind of a Santana-ish Latin sound too that they got when they were playing as the Hourglass in San Francisco. You know, they saw Santana. They were part of the San Francisco psychedelic scene. They really were. So they brought that back to Jacksonville, and they had that jam aspect, you know, jam band aspect, which they picked up from the Grateful Dead while they were in San Francisco. Cowboy was like a folk rock thing, and their idol was Graham Parsons. And I don't know what it's country, blues, hippie music for whatever that means. Could mean a million things. Jam band, I guess that's the same thing. Jazz. It's a gumbo. There's the cool thing about it is there really is no definition. If I say my music's Southern rock, then by God, it's Southern rock.
Somebody's going to have to fight you about it.
You try to tell me different.
All right. Southern rock is as complicated as Jacksonville is, or maybe the vice versa. Jacksonville is complicated as Southern rock. I don't know. We can argue about that one too. Allison, is it time to open it up for questions from our audience? I will ask if we've got any from online first, and then if not, Imani, do we have any questions? Okay. How about here in the room at the Willow Branch Library? Yes, ma'am.
I'm glad you asked that.
So
Not very well.
Let's repeat the question so the people who are listening
she wants
online.
to know how my guitar playing went, and did that contribute to my career as a musician? The fact of it is, I wasn't good enough. I mean, you're talking about a town with some killer, I mean, an abundance, an overload of killer guitar players, and I couldn't keep up with any of that. I was actually quite daunted. But there were times when I didn't want to pick up a guitar around these guys. You mean got your Randall Halls and your Auburn Burrells and your Dickie Bettses, and I mean, it just goes on and on. Jeff Carlisi, and I didn't even want to pick up. These guys really had me daunted. I went to an audition with Donnie Van Zant's band and Jeff Carlisi's band called Sweet Rooster. And I went to the audition, and I'm like, oh man, I can't do this. Needless to say, I didn't pass the audition.
You still got that guitar you walked over to Paul Glass's house with?
No, I painted it and sold it, unloaded it for $600 back in the 90s. I painted it like Eric Clapton's SG, psychedelic SG. I wish I'd kept it though. It's probably worth a couple thousand now.
No kidding. It's probably out there somewhere.
Yeah, it probably
If
is.
only its owner knew its storied history.
Paul was a monster on guitar and a great singer. I sort of made it on my singing because I really couldn't cut it on the guitar. I mean, I was okay. I was serviceable. You know, I could get the job done. I could do a respectable solo. But I mean, in a town with guys like, you know, Carlisi, you know, what could you do? You had to sing or play bass or something, which I did.
And apparently Dwayne Allman wasn't much of a singer either.
Oh, he was god awful. There's some stuff of him singing. His band was supposed to be a power trio like Cream. He was living here in Jacksonville, and I think he moved in with Ellen Hopkins right down the street here on Riverside Avenue. And he was living in the same house with a lot of the guys in the Second Coming. I think he was trying to insinuate himself into the Second Coming. And he stayed here in Jacksonville and hung around with those guys and jammed with them. And they never did invite him to join the band. So he said, the hell with this, I'm going to Muscle Shoals and see if I can be a session player. So he went to Muscle Shoals. He got hired, and he was on records by Wilson Pickett, Aretha Franklin, a lot of famous people. And Jerry Wexler from Atlantic heard him playing on a version of Wilson Pickett's version of Hey Jude. And Jerry Wexler goes, who on earth is that playing? And Rick Hall said, oh, that's one of my session boys. And Rick Hall had him signed to a record deal. So they tried to put a band together around him, and he was the front man, the lead singer, and a guitar player, and that wasn't cutting it. That wasn't cutting it. He had to get Greg in there.
And he came back to Jacksonville.
He came back to Jacksonville looking for more players, and then he called his brother in Los Angeles, says, hey, man, I got a record deal and a new band. Come on out. So he did.
And that brother could sing.
Man, could he ever. He's one of my favorites.
Yeah. All the singing DNA went to Greg.
Sure did, man. That guy was a major, major talent.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, of course it's possible. You just have to pay. It would be expensive.
Repeat the question.
Oh, she wanted to know, could I put a CD of examples of these players in my book? And of course I would love to, but it's expensive. You have to pay two license fees. You have to pay the publisher, and you have to pay the owner of the recording. So it's very expensive. I did try to put a copy of Lynyrd Skynyrd's first recordings done here in Jacksonville when they were 1%. A friend of mine produced their first records, including the first version of Freebird, and he gave me a CD, and I negotiated with him to let me use that in the book as a giveaway. We couldn't use the name Lynyrd Skinnard, I don't think, because we'd probably get sued, but we could use the name 1% because that's the name he signed him under. So he had the rights to use that name. So, and everybody would know who 1% is by the picture of them on the little CD cover. And I had a deal with him. I was ready to buy, hundreds of them and stick them in the back of this book. And his dead partner's daughter just materialized out of nowhere after 20 or 30 years. And she put the kibosh on that. She didn't want to let us do it. She didn't want to let us use her father's. I haven't done that, but the easiest way, that's a really great idea. And the easiest way for me to do that. Oh, she wants to know, do I list recommended recordings from each of these artists so you can get an example? I mean, you could just say, Alexa, play some Cowboy. But yeah, maybe I could put that on no, I'd have to pay a lot of money. Oh yeah, to make a list, yeah. To put links in there, I'd have to pay money. But to make a list, yeah, that'd be, yeah, like a little bibliography, a discography. That's a really good idea. Like, yeah, recommended listening at the end of each chapter and have maybe 5. What is your definitive Southern rock?
What the question is, what is Fitz's definitive Southern rock album, right? Yeah, okay.
I think the Allman Brothers debut album. I could listen to that all day long, and plus it's got the 2 guitars and the soulful singing and the Hammond organ. It's just pretty listenable. There's other stuff too, though. I mean, I'm not a big Lynyrd Skynyrd fan, but I've got their gold and platinum, and there's, you know, four or five songs by them I really could stand to listen to a lot. Delbert McClinton, I really like him. Would you consider him Southern rock? I would. You know, he's from Texas, and it's blues, rock, and country, and funk. So I consider Delbert McClinton a Southern rocker, and he's one of my big favorites.
The question is whether there is a Jacksonville sound.
Yeah, and it's the guitars. It's the heavy, yeah, the big guitars, the double leads, the, you know, the long solos, you know, self-indulgent solos. Yeah, it's the guitars. Yeah, the Outlaws were a little more folk rockish, like Cowboy, but yeah, they had the dual guitars.
This must have been a good town to sell guitars in.
I'll bet it was. I'll bet it was. I bought my Gibson from Fred Paulus downtown. Any guitar players watching this will know who I'm talking about.
How about record stores? Did you hang out in record shops around Jacksonville?
I worked in record shops in Jacksonville. I worked at Cal's Records up on the north side, and I worked at Abe Levert Records downtown and in Five Points. I loved old Abe. What a great guy.
Yeah. Okay. Question is emerging talent in Southern rock. Speaking to those traditions,
I can think of one right off the top of my head called Calford Town, and they had the two guitars and the long hair and all the poses, and they play real well, and they sound real good. Calford Town. And there's a young guy named Buddy Crump who I think was with them for a while, and he's sort of a Southern rock player, but he's in more of a progressive rock band now called Danger Bird. But then, you know, what is Southern rock? Like I said, Southern rock is what we say it is. So if Danger Bird wants to call itself a Southern rock band, then it would be, right? Let's see. There's another one, Jack Corcoran's group, that's really, really good. Smokestack, but they're not young. And Kurt Town band also, but they're not young either. Were you asking me about young groups specifically? That's all I can really think of, but I think it's Southern rock really is making a comeback for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Well, you're a geographer and a historian. You know what the global South means.
That sounds like a question from one of my fellow academics. That the idea, the notion of a global South is a reference to the sort of regional boundaries and distinctions that you find in nations, especially nations that have a big kind of geography that runs north and south. So in the United States, when you say the American South, everybody knows you're talking generally about the states of the former Confederacy, right? In Italy, the South is a place that is sun-drenched and noted for a much more Mediterranean than a European culture, and there are pretty distinct boundaries between northern and southern Italy. In England, northerners and southerners speak disparagingly of one another. So I think that's what the questioner means by the global South.
I don't know. The global South has geopolitical ramifications too. It means a lot of the underdeveloped countries, because the northern countries, a lot of them were colonialist countries, and the global South were the countries that were colonized.
True enough. Yep. Yes.
I'm not sure what that question means. Well, of course it would be Tim Gilmore, because he knows what he's talking about. He got right to the heart of the matter too. And I deal with this. I do deal with this in a lot of depth in this book. First of all, rednecks.
Tell the audience what this is that we're dealing with.
He wanted to know the difference between rednecks and hippies, and was that reflected in the distinction between the Allman Brothers Band and Leonard Skinnard. Is that a pretty fair summation? And yes, that's one of my favorite topics. Rednecks now wasn't like Jeff Foxworth. In 1969, rednecks didn't mean, well, you had a junk car in your front yard. A redneck was a specific kind of Southerner, and you have these kinds of people in Boston where I grew up, but a redneck was a greaser who liked to drink and liked to fight. That's what a redneck was, a guy who liked to fight. Had nothing to do with the, junk washing machine in your backyard. And so hippies were all about peace and love. And so they were perfect victims for the rednecks because a lot of times they wouldn't fight back. So that they gravitate, the rednecks would go and have hunting expeditions for hippies to beat up. I mean, and we just hated each other. I referred to the movie Easy Rider about this. The rednecks and the hippies hated each other's guts, and they wanted to kill us. And so the Allman Brothers were pure hippies. I mean, they hung around with a lot of black people, and hippies were, for better or worse, loosely associated with black people because hippies admired black people and admired their music, and they, did a lot of things that black people did. They adopted black jargon and stuff like that. And so hippies were like white Negroes in a sense. And rednecks sure didn't like that, because they were like race traitors. I mean, this was seriously hostile stuff back then. And so the Allman Brothers come out and they're like, no, we're doing mostly black music here. We got a black guy in the band. We admire black people. We admire black music. They're our idols. And then Ronnie Van Zant comes along with Sweet Home Alabama, and people are still trying to figure out if that's pro-racist or anti-racist. And it's really ambiguous, let's say. I'm a little alarmed by a line in that song on the end, where it carries out, where it's fading out, and Ronnie Van Zant goes, "Oh, Montgomery's got the answer." I'm like, what on earth could he possibly mean by that? It don't sound good to me.
In Birmingham, they love the governor.
Well, then they go boo, 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 right? So to take it back. But, they did get an award from, they did get awards from Governor Wallace. He made them honorary colonels in the Alabama State Militia. And they accepted these awards and showed up at the ceremony and got photographed. So I don't know what it is with Lynyrd Skinnard. You hear that they're a bunch of rednecks. I knew a couple of the guys personally. They weren't. The ones I knew weren't. Leon Wilkeson, I knew very well. He was not a redneck, nor a racist, nor a bigot. And Alan Collins, I knew him pretty well. I worked with him. He was none of those things. I don't know about Ronnie Van Zant. I really don't know. I think the jury's out. I think he was trying to play it both ways. He said that he just used the Confederate flag because it was just a pride from the region he grew up in, but I'm not sure that that's what that means.
He might answer differently in 2021 than he would have in 1981. Fair enough.
Skynyrd tried to get rid of that flag in 2016. They were still using it. And, when it became an issue in South Carolina, when the state adopted a resolution to take it down from the state capitol in 2016, Skynyrd decided they were going to take it down too. And they got a backlash from the audience saying, you better put it back up. the Confederate flag. Right.
The book is Jacksonville and the Roots of Southern Rock from the University of Florida Press, out this year. It's available through bookstores. Check it out at your local library. It is available through the Jacksonville Historical Society bookstore, www.jackshistory.org. The author is Michael Ray FitzGerald. Dr. FitzGerald, this has been a treat, a pleasure, and entertainment, and we all learned things from you. Thank you.
I'm having a good time.